morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this morning for the Research Morning Part 2. My name's Elizabeth. I'm the Head of Research and Measurement at the IAB, and we're really happy to have you with us. So if we just begin, we wanted to say obviously a big thank you to UCOM, our sponsors for today, and we're going to be hearing from them shortly as well. Just before we begin with the speakers, you will probably see at the bottom a Q&A button. If you have any questions for any of our presenters today, if you could add your question there, and then at the end of each session with each presenter, we will go to the Q&A and answer any questions you've got. So please use that during the talks. Here's the agenda for this morning. So we're going to start with Julie from UCOM, who's going to do part 2 of her insights into how online consumption has changed due to COVID-19. And if you were there last week for part 1, it was a fascinating story. So we're looking forward to seeing part 2. Then we're going to hear from Leah from Behave, who's going to talk to us about some of the opportunities they've seen for growth for TikTok, followed by Joe from Lad Bible, who's going to talk us through some hot off the press research into young people and their spending habits. And then hopefully we'll have some wrap-up Q&A time at the end before we finish at 10:15. So I will, without further ado, pass over to Julie from UCOM. Julie.
Hi everybody, I'm just going to share my screen. I hope everybody's well, and I hope this works. Have a look. Can everybody see my screen? I'm kind of assuming yes, if not, just shout.
Yes, that's all good, Julie.
Excellent. Okay, so good morning, everybody. I believe most of you on the call last week, where I went through part 1 of my presentation, looking at the impact of COVID-19 on UK online usage. Today, I'm just going to continue with the second part. As you'll probably be aware by now, because I'm all of these, UCOM is the industry trade body that ensures that there are standards for online measurement, and ComScar is our partner. Before I start today, I just wanted to follow up on the question I had last week, which is really about who it's based on. And basically, I wanted to reiterate that all the data I'm showing is based on people, not accounts, not cookies, not machines, not logins, but people. And it's collected by a combination of a nationally representative panel and tagging. So it's reported at an aggregate person level. I just wanted to put that out there because I didn't go into detail last week and I had a couple of questions. Okay, so let me just... there we go. So last week, just to recap, if you weren't on the call, we had a quick look at time online and also some categories with a bit of a focus in more detail on 4 of them, which had witnessed some big uplifts between Jan and March. And that was food retailing, both supermarkets and food delivery services. News, we saw huge news growth across all sorts, technology, political, finance, business, social networking, instant messenger, and also combined with that video chat. Today, I'm going to focus on 4 more categories which have seen uplifts. They're probably not quite as big and maybe not so much kind of as interesting for the advertising industry. But nonetheless, I think what we do is show consumer changes of behaviour. So it's of interest to all of us. So that's government, health, education, and entertainment. And then I'm going to finish off just by looking at some of the properties and apps which have seen the biggest growth. So first of all, looking at government, we saw huge changes, probably no surprise, and almost 20% overall unique visitors was up by 5.6 million between Jan and March. Now almost in March, almost 3/4 of UK adults had visited a government site. As you can see here, gov.uk was one of the main beneficiaries, had a 49% increase, almost 10 million additional unique visitors from 19.9 to 29.2. And I guess all the news on coronavirus, from health and testing, work and financial support, school closures, business, information for self-employed, and also you can also see all the press conferences on that site. So I guess no surprise that there's huge uplifts. And there was also big uplifts for the equivalent sites for Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. HSE is the Health and Safety Exec site, and CDC is an American site, the Centre for Disease Control. So obviously a lot of information on there. So all of these we were seeing big increases in. Another area, so it's going to be a bit shorter today, my presentation, I guess is less of interest, some of these categories, but another area, I guess, not too much of a surprise. And one of the things I said last week was that most of what I'm talking about is quite intuitive. So it might be, oh yeah, it's all very obvious, but sometimes it's really good to have the data and the stats to back up our kind of intuition. So we saw unique visitors to health content increased by 2 million, and visits were also up by a huge amount. What I've done on this chart, and I hope Comscore don't mind, on the left, I've looked at some of the biggest growing health content sites as classified by Comscore. So these are the ones that added the most users. So they're not necessarily the biggest, but they were the ones that had the most users, added the most users between January and March. So they saw the most growth. They also added in asthma.org because that was in a different category, but I thought that was particularly interesting because it added 1 million visitors. So obviously people concerned about the impact on their health. So big ones there, obviously NHS and the World Health Organization, but we saw big increases across the board. And on the right, what I've done is I've actually picked out the healthcare retailers from the retail category. I've also added in Boots and Superdrug. I think they're probably classified as beauty, but I think quite interesting during this time and looking at how they've all grown too. And one of the, I think the key things is to see how many online chemists we were seeing showing a growth. And as I mentioned last week, we saw higher growth rates for health sites amongst those over 55s. Visits likely to be driven by them trying to get online prescriptions potentially, and also generally things like hand sanitizer, face masks, huge interest. This is in March, don't forget. People also looking to boost their immune system, probably Holland and Barrett also showing an increase. So bear in mind this is in March. We are really interested to see what's going to happen going forward, but big increases across the board in health. The third category, and I know this only too well, is education. Another obvious one, usage more up against among parents. Schools, remember, only closed on about I think it was the 20th of March, and parents like myself turned to the internet. I mean, I'm very familiar with many of the brands I'm about to show you because I have spent the last 5 or 6 weeks trying to work at home and homeschool my kids who are aged 6 and 7. And actually, I put that picture on the right, which someone sent me, because it really has described my house and how I felt for much of the last few weeks. But you can see here that Twinkle and BBC Bite Size are probably the two biggest, both around 2 million. Twinkle showed big growth, a lot of the schools linking to that site. BBC Bite Size, I think, will show a much bigger increase in April, May, because around just after Easter, around the 20th of April, they launched a programme of education offering online lessons for every age group across all subjects. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts BBC's figures going forward. And also I would expect to see the government, they launched the Oak National Academy on the 20th of April, so I expect to see that up there too. But you can see across the board, a lot of these, not massive numbers compared to obviously sites like social networking and the news that we looked at last week, but they've all shown a growth. TT Rockstars, Times Tables Rockstars. For anybody who has kids, you have my utmost sympathy at the moment, and I'm there with you. I think it's quite interesting to see other things like language learning. I think what we found is in the March, it'd be interesting to see, I think people were much more concerned about, there's all the panic buying, getting my food, getting my health. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how consumer behavior changes as people realize I'm at home more now. Actually, now I've got this time, for some people, most of them who don't have kids, got this time at home, what can I do with it? And be interesting to see if we get some more educational sites coming next time. The next one is entertainment. I haven't focused too much on entertainment. There were some sites, and I'm pleased to say Lad Bible was one of them, which saw a huge uplift in unique visitors. I know Lad Bible are presenting later on. I guess the much needed humour, their fun videos was probably quite pleasant for people in this time in March. They did see a big increase of over 2 million additional unique visitors. But most of the change for this category was in time online. And this is most evident for video streaming services and to a lesser degree music. And that's really because they generate most minutes. So minutes were up about 5%, but consumers who visited this category were spending over an hour, over an extra hour on entertainment. This chart just shows entertainment apps. I've picked out the video and music apps where time online has increased. So I've not chosen everything. These aren't the top ones. But what you can see really is that most of the time online growth is coming from YouTube. So the YouTube app, there's an additional 2.1 billion minutes consumed between January and March. That's over 45 minutes extra per user. If you included desktop and all browsing in that as well, then it's even bigger. It's nearly an hour and a half or over an hour and a half. I think it's 98 minutes actually, additional minutes spent on YouTube per user. Other ones as well, lots of people downloaded Amazon Prime in December because they were showing Premiership football. I guess once people have subscribed, there's been an increase there in terms of time spent as well, people choosing to use Amazon Prime. Some of that will be natural growth anyway. And obviously Netflix, this is only looking at mobile apps. I guess with people at home more, maybe there'd be more viewing via TV set. What I would say as well is that we saw Netflix Party add over 250,000 users in March, and now it's got over 300,000 users. Not currently generating lots of minutes, but I think more people will be exploring it, so it's one to keep an eye on. So across the board, minutes on streaming services. Now, that kind of concludes the 8 categories that I wanted to focus on where we saw uplifts, the main ones. But just a reminder, if you was on the call last week, you remember I talked about uplifts and often some categories that have suffered as a result of COVID. And these are just a reminder that lots of categories went down. So travel, for example, hotels, home sharing, things like Airbnb, that went down by 30% in terms of unique visitors, which is like a negative of 5.1 million adults. Online travel agents as well, lost 6.1 million. Travel information, I said before, things like TripAdvisor was 6 million down, airlines as well, 22% down in terms of UVs, and also cruises. So clearly travel hugely impacted, no real surprise. In terms of non-grocery retail, we talked about retail quite a bit last week in terms of food and supermarkets. The two that kind of highlighted in March to show decreases was tickets. Again, not much of a surprise if you can't go to go and see anything, then you're not going to go and visit any ticketing website. That was down by 3 million. And also clothing retail. That may pick up a little bit, but I guess if people aren't needing to go out, maybe there's no need to buy any new clothes. And I said last week that we're seeing really kind of negative results from companies like Next. I know a lot of them now repositioning themselves as online. Another one that went down as well in terms of retail quite significantly was luxury goods, jewelry, that kind of stuff. People aren't going to spend on that when they're a bit uncertain around their job. Other areas, just to quickly go through this, I didn't want to dwell on going through these detail with charts because it's all a bit negative, but property, all this information you can get in any detail that you want, looking at all the brands. Property was down 25% in terms of time, lost about 3.6 million visitors. Jobs and careers, again, also was down 26% in terms of minutes. I think that's also because January is normally quite a peak time for searching for a job. In the new year, everyone thinks, right, I'm going to get a new job. And then by March, I think people were thinking, actually, it's probably best I stay where I am, particularly given all the government initiatives. So kind of that was decreasing. It might be interesting to see later on in this year whether that picks up again, as unfortunately people may end up being made redundant. Also automotive, again, down, high purchase, people not interested in looking for them. And maps, people weren't really going anywhere. So that was down by 3 million in terms of unique visitors, down by 8% in terms of audience. And finally, for the negative categories, sport, it didn't actually see a huge decrease in terms of visitor numbers, but I guess that's because, as I said last week, there was still a lot of sporting events in March, including Cheltenham, which we know a lot about now, and also the Liverpool Champions League game. So people were still visiting sport, but what we did see was a huge decrease in minutes. And I think that's because in the back end of the month, there were less Premiership matches shown and just less coverage of sports content. So we saw a decrease of 39% in terms of time online in March. And I would imagine that would be even lower when we move through to April data. Now, every quarter, if you're familiar with UCOM, you'll know that we produce a digital market overview. What I'm showing you today isn't our standard one, it's a little different. But as part of that, I normally take a look at those properties or sites and apps that have grown most. And also, I always put the top 20 in there just to see how they've changed in the last 3 months. So I thought I'd do the same this time. And what you can see here is these are the properties that have added most unique visitors from Jan to March. So these are the properties. So it's almost like, if you like, it's the parent, it's the holding group. And what you can see here, there's really no surprises. If you've sat through both presentations of mine, I've probably mentioned nearly all of these in the last couple of weeks. It's news. If you look here, The Guardian, Sky, Telegraph, BBC, Reuters, they're all in terms of the top growing. It's government, which we've talked about, and health, NHS Today, food retail like Tesco. It's video chat, Zoom and House Party, and also social. And I'm pleased to say that TikTok is in there as well as one of the biggest growing, as I know that we're going to hear about TikTok later on. And of course, not forgetting one of my favorites, Worldometer, which is a very basic, simplistic site, but it does provide global COVID-19 data from official reports. I also noticed that it is carrying advertising. I believe it's represented by Freestar, and it went from pretty much 0 to 10 million across February to March. When looking at mobile apps as opposed to overall properties, you can see some similar brands, but also a few different ones. So you've got Samsung's Upday app and Apple News, which I also mentioned last week, as well as Microsoft Teams and also Word. So people are working from home, downloading those kind of tools. And also some of the Facebook brands split out. So you've got not only Facebook as a brand, and I mentioned that last week, but also WhatsApp and also Instagram. These are the actual apps that people that have seen the most growth between January and March. TikTok on there again. And finally, this is looking at the apps that added most minutes. I think it's quite useful for some of the categories, which again, I said before, like social media, entertainment, where it's much more, they've got almost saturation in terms of usage. So they've got such high reach that looking at unique visitor growth, sometimes you don't see such an uplift, but what you do see is a lot higher usage. So you can see here, WhatsApp, Facebook and YouTube, those three all added the most minutes. They're obviously the biggest, but they're also the kind of activity where you spend a lot of time doing it, and also TikTok in there too. Finally, just going to look at the top 20 properties just to see how they fared. Now, pretty much every quarter that we do this, I'd say probably about 18 out of the top 20 properties don't change. This is showing the percentage uplift in terms of unique visitors. And I always say beware. Normally I show the data from the last month and this month, but I'm aware that it's a bit of data overload. I've shown a lot to you. So this is really looking at the percentage increase. And the reason why I say I'd be a little bit careful is what I said before, and things like Google and Facebook, when they've got over 80–90% reach, you're not going to see huge uplift. It's impossible to see the huge uplift that you might see for smaller brands. So that's why they're maybe not quite as big as some of the others. But really nearly across the board, we're showing some kind of increase, one or two slight decreases there. But generally, we're seeing some big uplifts. And gov.uk and USA Today both entered the top 20. They're not normally in the top 20, but having shown such significant growth, given all their news coverage. USA Today is the group of all the different news publications that they have in the UK as well. They own a lot of local UK news publications. Normally, over the last couple of years, the Hearst, Snap, TripAdvisor, they've been in and out of the top 20. When it's a good month for travel, TripAdvisor normally comes in, but obviously not this month. So gov.uk and USA Today have entered the top 20 and shown really big growth. And you can see there the other ones, Guardian, Sky, we've talked about those before, all showing big uplifts. And the similar thing with time spent, the top 20 properties. When I say the top 20, I should just highlight the ones across the bottom are the top 20 in terms of minutes, and the slide before was the top 20 in terms of size unique visitors. So I say they remain pretty much the same, give or take one or two every month, every quarter. So when we look at time, again, most went up, especially the news and the social media properties. Now, some of the games you'll notice went down from Zynga and Activation Blizzard. Activation Blizzard is pretty much Candy Crush, and I think Zynga, I might be wrong there, is Words with Friends. So possibility, I don't know whether the lack of commuting's had an impact or just generally people are at home now. I would imagine that games consoles may go up. We don't track games consoles, but knowing the friends I have who've got teens at home now that schools have closed, I'm pretty sure that if we were to track it, you'd see gaming go up there. So maybe less kind of, I guess, mobile gaming because people aren't out and about as much, and maybe a switch there. Be interesting. We'll have a look at that next time. One game that we did see an increase in was Minecraft, actually. Now, Spotify, you might think that's a little unusual, has gone down. We are looking into this because I was a little bit surprised as well. I just want to check everything's okay with the data, but I think this could be that January was a pretty high month for Spotify in terms of time. And with so many users using Spotify, it only takes a slight decrease in the average time you spend per month to see a decline. And again, it may be the lack of commuting or gyms being closed, the kind of areas where people consume Spotify in quite big numbers may have had an impact. But as I say, I'm going to double check that with Comscore, because I would have expected it to go up, but who knows? So that essentially concludes UCOM's look at how COVID has impacted online behaviour in March. We're going to do an update based on April data, so do look out for that, because I think it will be interesting to see how things change as people get used to being at home. We are going to need to wait till late May to get that data in from Comscore, so it'll probably be the end of May / beginning of June, if I can find the time between teaching my children, who I'm glad haven't burst in today. But on the note of data, I just wanted to let you know that if you do like this kind of information, that from January next year, and I know it's a bit of a long way off at the moment to think about that, but as a result of a new contract that UCOM has, we will have weekly and daily data, which I think going forward will enable us to get really granular insights more quickly. So that won't be till next year, but I think it's going to be really useful, and I just wanted to let you know that that is on the roadmap for UCOM. Put this chart up here if you want to get any more information. We do, as I say, regular insight pieces. Currently, what we will produce will be based on what's going on, pretty much the changes over the last and the next few months, but all of that will be put on our website, and here is our website address. So if you have any questions, I think that's going to happen after all the presentations or after this, but this is our contact details, and thank you very much, especially for both of you who've sat through me for the last 2 weeks, but I hope you found it useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. That was fascinating, and I'm sure everyone else will agree. I can't wait to see what the April insights show us as well. Are there any questions for Julie? We haven't had any on the Q&A, but if anyone has one they want to ask now, we can do that for a minute. Well, if not, then we will hopefully have some time right at the end to ask any follow-up questions. So what I'll do now is I will hand over to Leah at Behave, who's going to show us an interesting project with TikTok.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? I think so. Elizabeth?
Yes, we can see that. Thanks, Leah.
Amazing. So thank you, Julie, for that. It was really, really interesting. And so you mentioned TikTok kind of quite a lot, and it's really interesting to see that kind of brand, that kind of app actually taking a lot of, having a lot of kind of power in Europe and across the world right now because of what it provides to people. So I'm going to talk to you today about how us as Behave kind of help TikTok in powering and sustaining growth within Europe. And actually, essentially what I do is I focus on understanding human behavior and psychology and feeding that into brands and businesses. And that's what we do as Behave. I'm a consultant within Behave, which is essentially a research agency, a behavioral science consultancy that stemmed out of the Total Media group. So anyone that knows me actually knows that I tend to get really carried away. So that's why I just laid down an agenda for today. So I'm just going to give a short intro into Behave first, and then I'm going to jump into how we help TikTok in growing within Europe by talking you through some interesting ways that we use and layered different research techniques. And then hopefully, if there's some time, I'll work towards answering your questions. So essentially, as I mentioned, we're a behavioral science consultancy. So we use a set of behavioral techniques and tools to actually understand human behavior, to add value to clients, and then answer their core challenges. What we do is we try to make complex challenges more simple. And that's actually what we did for TikTok. And I'm really happy and excited to talk about it with you. So what does that mean? That actually means that we take a full-fledged view on humans. So we look at how humans think, what they see, what they hear, what they feel, what they say, and what they do, and in a full-fledged a picture. And you're going to actually see that slide broken down throughout the presentation. I think it's going to become really familiar and kind of stuck in your brains, because I'm going to show you about how we kind of look at that for TikTok specifically. So we all know that TikTok is a global phenomenon right now. TikTok had tremendous growth within the past year, and we're very excited to take part in that adventure. And TikTok right now has leading positions in Europe, not just across the world in Q1 2020, but it's also second in France, it's third in Germany, it's second in the UK. So it's really interesting to see that and actually actually kind of take part in that. So what we actually did for TikTok is we applied and layered a set of innovative research techniques throughout the year to guide them in generating and sustaining growth in Europe. Essentially, we did that in different ways, but we also, I'm just going to take a focus for that presentation. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the ways that we did that. So essentially, we discovered core audiences for them to grow within Europe. We dissected those audiences in different ways, looking at needs, perceptions, but also their emotions and their personality. And also we used neuromarketing to build out robust touch points for TikTok across Europe, from their website to their ads. So I'm really excited to take you guys through that. So essentially I laid that down in 3 sections. So how did we actually identify and grow those audiences for TikTok across Europe, when we just had that broad mission of finding them, like who are those people, which audiences can we grow? Second, once those were established, how did we deep dive into their perception and needs in relation to TikTok? And then the third part that I'm really excited about is how do we leverage neuromarketing to actually shape the brand, not just as an app, but as what it stands for across Europe. So just to begin with, I'm going to talk about how we identify and grew those audiences for TikTok. So essentially, it's a matter of understanding what's happening in the market, what people are conversing about, what people are saying, and that's what's kind of our core focus during that phase. So I hope you can kind of see the text well here, but essentially what we started to do is we wanted to collect as much data as we could in 5 core markets, so France, UK, Germany, Russia, and Italy. And what we did is we set up our parameters of location within those 5 markets, and we use our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook APIs to gather an initial base of 97 million people. But then, since our target was people aged 18 to 34, as TikTok wanted to age up as well, we ran our image recognition software to actually scan profile pictures. And we then brought that number down to a confident kind of set of people that are within that bracket. So then we had 3 million people that were within that target group. And then where possible, we were able to link their accounts in different kind of social channels, and we try to access their accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, VQ, SoundCloud, so kind of try to enrich their social footprint. And where possible, we're able to get access to 10 key channels, including VQ in Russia, for example, which was really useful for that. So once we had that and we collected that, it was really important for us to just start building some sort of content hypothesis about what that audience consumes in general and what type of content resonates with them. So using Google BigQuery, we looked at everything that indexed within a set time frame in the market to understand kind of the content demands at scale in those markets and globally. But then what we did is, using our access to CMS data, so publisher CMS data, we actually looked at what was resonating with that target demographic specifically, because we wanted to look at what they were reading versus what they were pushed at what was pushed at them specifically. So after doing that, we kind of built some sort of content hypothesis around what might be of interest to them and what sort of content they engage with. Obviously, that's when it starts to get really interesting. Obviously, not everyone in the same demographic behaves the same. You can be the same age, but have kind of different content affinities. So using machine learning, we pulled the historic social data of those people that we actually investigated through kind of having access to their social handles. So we pulled their historic social data, and then we uncovered their core interests based on their interactions and content consumption. So after that, we had access to, and we kind of clustered those and categorized those in interest groups that we also like to call tribes. You can email me to ask me why, but it's kind of a scientific term that we really like to use to categorize people in different groups. So after that, we had 48 different potential audiences and tribes. Obviously, we wanted to look at what we should prioritize for TikTok during that time frame, look at opportunities within those tribes. So what we did is we recreated those audiences on TGI Europa using weighted distribution, and then we looked at their actual population size, their addressable size in the market, and we also explored, in line with that, their behavioral habits and their lifestyle goals to look at how strong of a category fit in the short term or in the long term they could be for TikTok within Europe. So after that, we then had a focus and decided to select 13 priority tribes that would be a great opportunity for TikTok within Europe. So then now that we had a specific focus, we decided to go back to the social data and actually dissect their actual content consumption, because it gives you who they actually interact with and their affinities. And then we enriched those accounts with their followings, their media affinity, their top content engagement. We were able to infer the personality and get other interests as well. So of course, during throughout that period, we always kept track of TikTok's mentions in the news. We wanted to make sure that whatever we were pushing at those tribes and those audiences, that we weren't trying to kind of fill a major gap. We wanted to understand what was the current perception in the market. So we kept that in mind, what was pushed by publishers in the news. And when we kind of had a full-fledged understanding of that, and we kind of enriched those tribes, we created those go-to market packs for TikTok. So they started using those to communicate last year. So the top influencers that they used, the brand partnerships that they actually activated, the media channels that they focused on, the sort of content that they should create, and also the top NGOs, for example. So that was how we kind of identify those audiences of focus that TikTok is currently focusing on as well, and then kind of started building out an understanding around them. So obviously it's very important to understand who your audience is, but you should also look at that audience in relation to TikTok. You should look at their perception, how they feel towards the brand. So you know how to communicate to them specifically, understand the barriers and opportunities. So that's where we actually look at emotions as well and their actual behavioral data. So we knew that we had a vast amount of data collected. We knew that we had that at hand, but we also wanted to understand with a large scale of data, the perception of TikTok within our priority tribes. So for confidential reasons, I can't mention which tribe it is. So I call it Priority UK Tribe. So what we actually did is, so we had 500,000 social handles, and we wanted to understand the core themes that those 500,000 people were actually talking about when it came to TikTok and competitors. So what we did is we took those 500,000 social handles of those audience members, we enriched those with text, so with their conversations throughout a specific time frame, and then we filtered that and we narrowed that down to mentions of TikTok, of Instagram, Snapchat, and YouTube, specifically to understand perceptions around competitors as well. And then using our natural language understanding and AI emotions analytics software, what we did is we kind of applied that to the text to identify the primary emerging themes across those 500,000 people and their conversations around those brands. The result is this magnificent SWOT that you can see here. And actually doing that enabled us to actually look at what 500,000 people within that tribe, within that interest group, was talking about, and was kind of picturing TikTok. So we could find kind of areas of opportunities and barriers when it comes to TikTok, because their word and their text had a specific emotional valence to them. It had a negative sentiment or a positive sentiment, or even some sort of joy or anger, if you look at emotions specifically. And you were able to cluster that by volume of mentions of those teams and their respective emotional valence allocated to them. So we did the exact same thing for competitors, because you wanted to see what were the opportunities for TikTok, what competitors were not leveraging, how people were seeing Instagram and for what purpose, how they were seeing Snapchat, how they were seeing YouTube. And for example, we can see here that YouTube ads had a very negative kind of perception in the market, because they created some sort of unsmooth experience. So how can we, for example, help the TikTok ad teams in actually start launching a smooth experience on TikTok? So using that method, we were able to get millions of conversations to actually be clustered with this method in specific emotional valences and themes. A great result of also having access to people's text, what they talk about and how they talk about it, is actually through their sentence structure, through their tone of voice, even through the topic and keywords that they mention. We're able to understand their personality. We're able to see how they are and kind of how they would behave, and the extent to which they'd accept a specific brand comes. So here, for example, this is the Priority Tribe's personality. As we can see, they are excitement seeking. They have some sort of great imagination, but they're very neurotic. They're prone to worry. They're a bit immoderate. They're a bit anxious. So then it's really important to create some sort of understanding in parallel of TikTok's brand personality and TikTok's written brand personality across their website or across their branded touch points, to see if TikTok as a brand matches the personality of that audience and can actually be a reflection of how that audience wants to be talked to. So that's actually an activation and something that we did, and it's really interesting to see the results of that, and see that whenever you adapt your branded touch points in a way that's kind of a reflection of what the audience wants to hear, even if it's just changing the copy, for example, changing its font or changing the way it's structured, that actually creates amazing results. Obviously, I mentioned that we looked at data at scale, but during kind of when you want to investigate attitude and perception, it's very important to not just look at breadth, so not just like at volumes of mentions and everything that happens, and then obviously cluster that, but it's also very important to look at depth. So what we also did is, one of the way that we did that through qualitative research is that we took part in real time in over 20 audience members' explorations of TikTok, so we could get more granular into their attitudes and perceptions. So using a mix of research method to then deep dive into those audiences that we unveiled in phase 1, we were actually able to go back to TikTok and give them recommendations for marketing, recommendations for product. And that was literally by using a set of research methods at scale and more in depth that we combined together to actually talk bespokingly to that specific audience, that specific tribe. So it's very important to understand your audience. It's obviously very important to know how to talk to them, and to talk to them in a way that would get them at any specific touch point, at any interaction, to engage with the brand and feel like you add value to them as a brand. So to do that, you also need to shape TikTok's touch points in a way that would appeal to them and add some sort of value and be seamless in their experiences. So that's how we use neuromarketing. We look at what people see in specific assets, what it makes them implicitly think, and then also how they feel through understanding their emotions. So, for example, one of the activities that we did for TikTok, and that TikTok is actually kind of very excited to do right now and to launch is the fact that we run some predictive eye tracking on their website. So the reason for that is that TikTok is an app. TikTok is growing. A lot of people are enjoying being on the app and kind of interacting with people with their kind of core interests. But it's really important to build a website as well, because the website is a core asset. It's a core place where TikTok can talk about what they do for charities, show tutorials, have creators talk about their experiences. So it's important to not disregard the website and make sure that it's there for people that already downloaded the app and are proud of being on there and learn how to use it better, and kind of new and potential new users. So for example, for potential new users, we need to make sure that the call to actions are visible enough and are kind of attention grabbing. So predictive eye tracking is essentially kind of a collection of millions of data points around how the human eye is attracted to shapes, text, images, and then it kind of predicts the potential attention that people would put on your page when they go on it. So we look at attention map, which is on the right, which actually shows us where the eye is most likely to look at. And then we also look at regions of interest, which shows us that how attention grabbing a section of the page is compared to another section. And this is very important for both a brand that wants to convert its visitors, to make sure that they put the attractive elements in specific areas, to make sure that they use the right colors, the right font, but also for a brand that's kind of building itself and wants to make sure that the branded cues are positioned in the right place. So that's one of the ways that we help TikTok in building TikTok, not just as being an app for fun, just an app for people to use and enjoy and be together and share their interests, but also as a brand, and to lead people towards the specific sections that they'd be specifically interested in when they scroll throughout the website. Also, that's something that I really love to do, and it's something that we're really proud of. What we did for TikTok, we kind of tested their year-end campaign. Actually, one of the ways that we did that, believe it or not, we looked at the sweat glands of participants when they looked at the ad, which is called like galvanic skin response. So what we do is actually we look at we get people in house, and we ask them to actually look at the ad specifically. And so we track galvanic skin response with it, which are the peaks here. So how engaged are people within specific sections of the app, and why would they be engaged? And then emotion recognitions, which are the type of emotions that actually come through when people look at an ad. Are they angry? Are they sad? Are they happy? And eye tracking. So eye tracking, those are kind of the little kind of bubbles that you see here. Eye tracking is very important because it gives you whether or not people look at your tagline. For example, at the end of a video, it gives you, for example, the interesting elements that people look at, so you can cut some sections or not. So that's also one of the ways that we keep building out TikTok's touch points, to make sure that whatever they communicate to their users or their potential users is going to be appealing and interesting to them. Now, finally, I wanted to mention that part, because it's also very important to make sure that you build the ad based on what people want to see. You know, maybe have some appealing content, have appealing sections, have engaging sections, and actually create some sort of feeling, so people will actually be happy to share, to kind of share your mission and share your purpose as a brand. But also, it's also very important to look at everything. So, for example, here we realized when we looked at the SWOT, and also that when we looked at the different data points, that this priority tribe, for example, talks a lot about celebrities. They were like, yeah, but if a celebrity is on the app, I want to be on the app. But the thing is, that was not the case for a lot of different audiences. Some audiences are, for example, are curious. They want to learn tricks. They want to learn tricks from people that are similar to them. So some sort of UGC content that teaches them to do different things, that they value relevancy more than an authority figure. So what we did is, and it's especially true during this time, the importance of remote testing across the world. What we did is we tested remotely the use of celebrity content with a specific audience, and then the use of UGC content with a specific audience. And we did that for 3 or 4 others. And then based on that, TikTok has a focus on when to upweight celebrities and to get them in and to push them to a specific audience, or when to focus on kind of the essence of the app sometimes, which is getting people to do their own tricks, getting people to be very imaginative, and kind of encouraging some more niche tribes to actually learn things throughout the app. And we did that by looking at the emotions that were coming out when people were looking at those people, and they were looking at those assets, the intensity, how focused they are, how engaged are their eyes when they look at it, do they flinch their eyebrows, do they smile, and the attention that goes throughout the ads. So yeah, we're very proud to have taken part in, and still we're still taking part in TikTok's growth within Europe. So TikTok is obviously a global phenomenon right now, and they're very disruptive. They're real partners. They make sure that they add value to people across. So yeah, I was really excited to share this with you, and I wish I could talk more, but yeah. If there's any question, feel free to ask them.
Thanks, Leah. That was fascinating, and given what we saw from UCOM earlier about how much UCOM has, TikTok has grown, I think that project would be even more useful to TikTok than previously. In terms of timing, what we're going to do is move on to Joe from Lad Bible. I can see we've had a couple of questions, but if we leave those right till the end of the session, we can come back and talk to Leah about those at the end.
Yeah, sure.
If I introduce Joe now from Lad Bible, who's going to take us through some new research into young people and their spending habits.
Thanks very much. Hey everyone, my name's Joe. I'm an account director working at Lad Bible Group. So today I'm going to take you through our insights paper, Young People and Spending. But first I'm going to give you a very short introduction as to who Lad Bible Group are, so you understand a bit of the context around the research. So first I will seamlessly transition into sharing my screen, as if by magic. Okay, great. So Lad Bible Group are a social publisher. We've got over 140 million followers across different channels and different social platforms globally. We've got a highly engaged community as well. So our content on Facebook alone generates over 730,000 comments from our audience every day across all of our channels. And our mission statement as a company, so we want to give the youth generation a voice by building communities that laugh, think and act. And a few lockdown examples of these. So the first one, laugh. This is what people know us for, what we've been doing for years. And an example of a meme on Lad Bible. My boss turned herself into a potato on our Microsoft Teams meeting and can't figure out how to turn the setting off. So she was just stuck like this entire meeting. So very relatable content there. But we've been broadening our remit into more serious content as well. We've got a team of journalists who are working up in our Manchester office. We've been working closely with government on their comms for a while now. And recently at one of their daily press briefings, our editor Simon Binns was given the opportunity to ask Priti Patel a question, and he asked a question around policing powers and how regularly they were being enacted. And finally, we encourage our audience to act. And something great that our AdOps team noticed recently was that every Thursday at 8 PM, we see a massive drop in traffic as our audience go out and clap for our NHS heroes and frontline workers around the country. So onto our insights paper, Young People and Spending. We feel that young people are often misrepresented in the media. So we wanted to have a look and bust some myths around spending, but ultimately prove some stereotypes as well. And a little around the agenda for today. So I'm going to take you through our methodology. We're going to look at some of the challenges that young people are facing around finance at the moment. And then our research is broken up into 3 different sections. We've got spending power and influence, spending themes and habits, and spending for a cause. And finally, I'll draw some conclusions. Okay, so onto the methodology.
Joe, sorry, just for a second. Your slides seem to have frozen on our side. I think. Yes, we're still stuck on the first slide.
Okay, let me do.
Try that again.
Shall I try again?
Yes, if you could, please.
Okay. Is that working?
Yes, we can see the methodology slide now. Yeah.
Okay. So you didn't miss much. So this was the last think and act section, and then intro, the agenda, the methodology slide. Okay.
Great, thank you.
No worries. Okay, so yeah, as part of this, we're building on existing research. So there are 3,380 respondents. So the research is primarily about adult Gen Z and millennials, but we wanted to contrast them with Gen X as well. And so the fieldwork for this was carried out in 2019. So we wanted to try and make this as relevant for you guys as possible. So a little IAB research breakfast exclusive. We surveyed some of our audience over the weekend as well. So we've got a few additional slides to see how our results are contrasting with lockdown now. So what challenges are young people facing at the moment? So tuition fees have gone up massively. Not so long ago, tuition was free and you could get an interest-free loan of £420 a year as a student, whereas now the average student who studies for 3 years finishes with £50,000 worth of debt.
Joe, sorry to interrupt you again. I think we're having the same issue. I wonder whether actually IAB, we've got the slides. So if we try and share them from our end and you'll just have to tell us when to go on to the next slide, that might be easier. Sorry about this.
No worries at all, that's absolutely fine.
Bear with us for a moment.
It wouldn't be a webinar without a few technical difficulties.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right,
Great.
will you just tell us when to stop and then we can carry on?
Okay, great. You can go on to the next slide, which is around the context of, here we go, perfect, the challenges that young people are facing. So yeah, as I said, tuition fees are higher than they were before. According to the OECD, the cost of living has gone up 3 times the median wage over the past 20 years. And for young people who are lucky enough to have some savings, they're saving less with a lower interest rate than pre-2008. And then kind of pan-generationally, money is a taboo subject. So Brits ranked money as more difficult to talk about than sex and politics. And it's having an effect on young people's mental health. So 53% of adult Gen Z said that they'd experienced some mental health problems off the back of money worries. Okay, on to the next slide. And a little COVID update, IAB Research Breakfast exclusive. So since lockdowns happened, 62% of people we surveyed said they were spending less, and 51% of them were actively using this time to try and save. But that didn't mean they were flush with cash. So 48% of people we surveyed said they're worrying about money more, presumably due to job insecurity. Okay, next slide. So how much do young people earn? So you can see from this chart that nearly 60% of adult Gen Z earn less than £18,000 a year. So you could conclude from that that they don't have much spending power, right? On to the next slide. But that's wrong, because actually their spending power extends beyond their own income and into that of their parents. And it's also worth bearing in mind that 53% of adult Gen Z who live with their parents also have jobs. Okay, on to the next slide. So we've concluded that they've got some spending power. So it's important to look at the social clout that they've got as well. And one of the great examples of this was with the Starbucks unicorn Frappuccino. So it was a limited availability drink from Starbucks, and it had the perfect storm of being scarce. Lots of Gen Z had fear of missing out, and it was hugely Instagrammable. So each day it was available, thousands and thousands of them sold. But kind of more interestingly for us, there were over 180,000 Instagram posts generated off the back of it. And this is summed up by a quote from our co-founder on the next slide. So from Ariane Kalantari, our Chief Operating Officer and co-founder. And he says, Gen Z face fresh challenges compared to their parents, but it would be a mistake to ignore their massive spending power and the influence they wield. As a generation, they're globally connected, more likely to live in the moment, and put a greater emphasis on spending on intangibles such as time and convenience. Technology has also sped up the entire consumer journey, catching many brands and retailers off guard. Okay, on to the next slide. And so we know that they've got big social clout and spending power, but we wanted to look at what was influencing their spending decisions. And what came out on top was word of mouth. But it was interesting, there was a discrepancy between millennials and Gen Z. So millennials were most likely to rank family as the biggest influence on their spending power, whereas Gen Z were more likely to rank friends. Okay, on to the next slide. And we wanted to look at how much influencers influence the spending power of young people as well, and whether influencers with more followers were more likely to have a bigger influence. And on to the next slide. But almost pan-generationally, the number of followers that influencers had didn't have an effect on the spending of that audience. And this is summed up in a quote by Marjo Polani on the next slide, who is the head of insights and strategy at Tubular Labs, which is a social media research agency. So many micro-influencers cater to more niche interests, and for this reason are considered more relevant to their audience. For the same reasons, publishers are increasingly choosing to work with micro-influencers who often deliver better value and return of investment, as well as access to more niche audiences that may be more aligned with that of their target audience. Okay, on to the next slide. So we might have a look a bit around the content that young people were consuming on social media, and unsurprisingly, 84% of content consumed on social media by adult Gen Z is influencer-led. But what was interesting is they're becoming increasingly frustrated with the content influencers are producing, and more so than millennials are. So 49% of Gen Z said they were frustrated with influencers, compared to just 12% of millennials. And then on the next slide, we'll have a look at what's frustrating them. So overwhelmingly, it came across that they were getting frustrated by the ads that influencers did. And the other three things that really came through can kind of be bracketed under authenticity. So things that frustrated them were photoshopping, promoting products they don't use, and being fake. So authenticity is hugely important for this generation. Okay, on to the next slide. So the next section is around spending themes and habits. Next slide, please. So we asked each cohort to rank these different verticals according to whether they thought of them as essential or non-essential, and some really interesting things came through. So Gen Z were most likely to rank skincare as essential. They were 1.3 times more likely than Gen X to rank skincare as essential. They also ranked TV as more essential to them than streaming services, which isn't necessarily backed up by audience data that we have. So we wonder if TV and streaming services are words that are becoming synonymous with each other for this generation. Interestingly, millennials seem to really prioritize things like takeaways, taxis, and cars, and feel like a real convenience-led generation. On to the next slide. So yeah, millennials are more likely than Gen Z to spend for convenience, so 10% more likely to spend more money to save time than Gen Z. The real discrepancy came between millennials and Gen X. So millennials are 50% more likely to spend more money to save time than Gen X are. On to the next slide. So we wanted to bust some myths and prove some stereotypes. So we gave our survey respondents a hypothetical situation. We asked them what they'd spend if they had £1,000, £10,000, and if they had £1 million. And they really stuck true to form. So I'm going to need to consult my notes for this one so I don't forget anything. Gen Z indexed much higher than millennials for personal items like phones, clothing, handbags, laptops, and iPads. Millennials really stuck true to form, and they over-indexed for things like experiences, eating out, and spending money on their friends and family. When it came to the £1 million question, millennials over-indexed 2.1 times to use the money to go on holiday compared to Gen Z. And Gen Z were reported to be the most cautious of the cohorts. And they ranked higher in terms of how many of them said they'd save money for each hypothetical situation. Okay, on to the next slide. And this is a little COVID update as well to see what people are spending money on now they're in their homes. After Julie bigged us up earlier for our traffic, I'll make sure all of our findings are consistent with her report. So very unsurprisingly, 67% of our audience are spending more money on food. That's hugely relatable for me. And then followed by home improvements, games, and finally alcohol. Okay, great, on to the next slide. So this is our final section, and spending money for a cause. So we wanted to look at whether spending money for a cause was a priority for this generation, and it came across absolutely that it was. So 77.3% of Gen Z said they're more likely to spend money on a brand if it stood for a cause that they believed in. And that goes down to 74.7% of millennials and 67% of Gen Z, and for 67% of Gen X, sorry. And the things they care about most, Gen Z, so the environment, eco-friendliness, animal welfare, and plastic consumption. Okay, on to the next slide. So what's really interesting is the gap between Gen Z and Gen X. So Gen Z are 2 times more likely to be concerned about plastics than Gen X are, and 4.4 times more likely to be concerned about animal welfare than Gen X are. On to the next slide. And this is the insight that led to us doing our campaign, the Trash Isles. So there's an island of plastic in the Pacific Ocean the size of France. So we went to the UN to try and register it as an independent country, as that obliges other countries to clean it up. And we saw massive, massive engagement, especially from Gen Z. It really resonated with our younger audience. Okay, on to the next slide. So aside from environmental woes, there are 2 key themes which really came through as to being important for Gen Z. So even though they want a brand that they buy from to stand for something, they're not looking to compromise on quality for that brand, and that includes price. The next thing that really came true was brand authenticity. So if a brand is preaching about something, they should live by the rules which they preach. So Gen Z aren't looking to buy from hypocritical brands, and that really came through. Okay, I'm on to the next slide. And so this is a quote from one of our focus groups. They said, "I love brands that are environmentally friendly and contribute back to the environment. I will always look at products to see what they stand for before buying." Okay, and on to the next slide. And this is our final little COVID update. So 66% agree that spending for a cause is still important. So that's slightly down on the field work that we did in 2019. So it's obviously still a really important issue for this generation. Interestingly, 78% are trying to support local businesses and buy from them. And finally, 62% will still try and buy sustainable products. Okay, on to the next slide. And then to draw some conclusions from this. So don't underestimate the spending power of Gen Z. Their spending power extends beyond their own and into that of their parents. Next one. Authenticity is key. To show Gen Z your brand or identity is authentic, you need to carefully define the voice behind the brand. And finally, the next one, stand for something. Be willing to invest in a cause. Gen Z would rather buy from a company which supports social and environmental issues over one that does not. And the final slide's just great. We made it to the end. Has anyone got any questions?
Thanks very much, Joe. That was a fascinating insight into some of the myth busting into Gen Z. But I'm most shocked to find out that there is a trash island the size of France. And I'm going to go to Lab Bible after this and see what you did about that, because that is quite shocking. Thank you very much for that. We are now going to go to the Q&A. So if you haven't already typed in a question for any of our presenters today, do look at the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add it there. I will just pop up and have a look and see what questions we've got, and we can go to the presenters. Right, so we've got one from for Leah from Gabby. The question is, in your research, have you looked at the longevity of the app and how sustained this growth can be? In what ways do you think TikTok will have to evolve to not end up like Vine?
Yeah, so we're actually doing that every single day. So that's exactly why we're kind of trying to build content verticals within the app. They're actually unique to it. That's also why we do a lot of creator satisfaction research to make sure that we kind of see like how to improve the app in a way that it won't die down. So we look across creators, we look across users, we look across brands as well. How are we able to launch ads, and how are we going to do it? So then our focus right now, it's a bit confidential, but our focus right now, to not be confidential, is kind of looking at content verticals that we can actually empower within the app. So like I mentioned, when we look at Ed Sheeran versus UGC content, so for that tribe, bespokingly, for that audience, do they want some sort of educational, interesting content, some sort of tutorials, or do they want more celebrities on the app? So that's why we kind of look into that every day, to understand how can we kind of create sustainable growth. So yeah, so that's actually what we do. We also map TikTok kind of in relation to Vine, and kind of its kind of product life cycle. to understand how we can kind of not avoid that, but make sure that we build it as a brand instead of just as an app. So make sure that we highlight that TikTok stands for that purpose. TikTok does that. TikTok is not just an app where you can go and enjoy and have fun with your friends and share kind of short form videos, but it's also a brand that stands for a purpose, because brands are more sustainable. Brands are able to kind of survive in the market, especially when you build that kind of sort of positioning around it. So that's how we can make sure that it's not going to just be great in the short term, but it's going to sustain in the long term. Yeah.
Thanks, Leah. I just want to say to all the participants that we will be sharing these slides afterwards as well. There have been a few questions about that, and I know a few of the slides looked a bit blurry and all got stuck, so you'll be able to see those slides when we send them around to all attendees afterwards. We also have a question for Joe. The question is, in the research with the 10,000, 100,000 and £1 million slides, which generation was more likely to buy a house, and did anyone talk about climbing up the housing ladder?
So I spotted that one in advance, so I've asked our research team. We're not sure off the top of our heads, but we're going to have a look at the data afterwards, and then I'm happy to send it through to you guys if that's okay.
Great, thanks, Joe. Are there any more questions for our presenters today? I'll give everyone a few minutes, otherwise we will start wrapping up. Okay, it doesn't look like we've got any more questions, so thank you very much for those questions that we've already had. Let's wrap up now. So thank you very much to all our presenters today. That was absolutely great. When you're leaving the webinar today, you will be asked to fill out a feedback survey. And if you could please just click in the chat function now to fill it out, or you'll be redirected to fill that out. That'll be really helpful for us, so we can get all feedback on how you felt the research breakfast was this morning. But otherwise, thank you very much to UCOM, once again for being our sponsor today. And thank you very much for attending. We hope you enjoyed it.